So this next section, it's a little bit hard to parse without visual aids. But a good way of thinking about this this next section is on reconceiving how we think of the self. Right? If the participant reactive attitude, which is the only way we can preserve any important sense of free will or autonomy, right, is important, then what we need to do is refigure the way we think about the self. Right? If autonomy really only derives its depth, as Strawson seems to imply, from the fact that there are other agents, right, who, when conceived of as agents, pose restrictions or obligations or threats to our own autonomy, right? In the second sense that was discussed, right? Then what happens is we get a view of the self that is interrelational, right? So it begins with not a single agent separate from the world and other agents, but importantly, that agent in interaction with other agents. Right? Which brings us to Ramchandra Gandhi, right, who was one of Mahatma Gandhi's grandsons and was a philosopher in his own right. And a lot of what Ramchandra Gandhi did was work on the structure of address, right? Linguistic exchange. And this plays into his own theory, thinking of the self. And I think this is a good way of reframing our thought about the nature of the self. So the structure of address is tripartite, right? So it has three parts that function together, right? In the same way that God is, the Trinity, but the Trinity are not each other, right? That's what it means for the address to be tripartite. So there are three elements that go into an address. There's an addressor, a speaker. There's the active address. So what's said and the direction that, and it's said with a particular direction in mind. So it's directed at someone. Right? And then there's the addressee, right? The person who is addressed. Right? So the very active address is all three of these taken together. Right? It's not speaker, active address, and active address, address and addressee. It's the active address. It's all of them together. Now, this framework lends itself to a Grishian interpretation of framework of meaning, right? And we've already lightly touched on H.P. Grice by talking about speech acts. Even though that's Austin's thing, it ties in with H.P. Grice's own intentionalist framework of meaning, which goes as follows, really. So you have the active address, right? You have the address, right? Speaker addressing the addressee, right? Speaker speaking to the addressee, right? That's number one. It's part one, is just the address itself. Now, bound up with this, right, is once the address is there, laid bare between the people, between the speaker and the addressee understands, and this is an important part of any active address, the addressee must understand herself to have been the intended recipient of the address, of the active address, right? And moreover, for the speaker to have given the address a particular intention, right? So this is the recognition of agency on the part of the one who is addressed and the one who is doing the addressing, right? The speaker. The addressee realizes that they, in particular, are being called attention to. right? They are being addressed. That this other agent is utilizing their agency with them, right? With the addressee. And it's a recognition of that agency. It involves a recognition of the agency, and in particular, the particular intention of the person, of the speaker. Right? And then, the person being addressed interprets what was said. And this all happens rapidly, right? The second part happens like it's a necessity for understanding for the third part, but it happens so fast that we don't even consider it separate from the third part. It's almost simultaneous. Right? Now, what is central to this idea is that to this notion of address is that every addressee, right, is a potential addresser. You don't talk to someone thinking that they won't respond. You might talk to your furniture or curse out your furniture when you stub your toe, for example, but you don't expect a response, right? That's venting. That's not addressing. Right? You talk to your dog, right, or to your pet. You would, and in doing that, you're addressing them because they can turn their attention to you. You think that they can respond, maybe not with language, but that they can respond. It's a recognition of their agency. So every person who is addressed, right, in being addressed, is being recognized for their own agency and their potential to address you in return. Right? And in them, the addressee, recognizing that one, they are being addressed, um, and therefore recognizing your own agency in addressing them, by addressing them, they recognize that you are someone who they in turn can address as well. This is the reason we don't really talk to ants, right? It's the difference between talking at and talking to, right? If you are addressing someone, you are talking to them, right? If you are talking at someone, right, then you at someone who you do not think can address you in return, then you are not in fact addressing them. Right? What you're doing is you're functionally speaking without any expectation or thought to the possibility of being spoken, of being addressed in a meaningful manner. Right? This is why talking at people is often very frustrating, because it's in denial on the part of the person speaking of your own agency, right? Your own thoughts, opinions, and that much, and that bulk, right? So there's this mutual recognition that's going on that every person is addressed is a potential addressee, or every person who addresses is also themselves a potential addressee. The way this works with the view of self is that the traditional view of self focuses on the I, the separateness of me from the world. I am me, I am an agent, the world is an object, right? And so there's this separation between the two. And when we parse that in terms of other people, what we get is I'm an agent, you're an agent, I'm I, right? We get stuck in our own heads. We get stuck in this first personal reference, right? So, like I said, not so great without visual aid. So this is the traditional view right here. Right? There's you, or I, and the world, right? And all of our agency is directed towards the world, right? We're agents, the world is just full of objects. Subjects, we're subjects, and the world is full of objects, until we encounter other subjects who can address us in turn, right? Now, what Gandhi's reconfiguring of the notion of the self with this idea of address involves is that we begin not as an I, but a you, right? And that the very presence of the thought of I comes from, a recursion of thought, right? From making division of ourselves, turning our attention to address ourself. The primacy is not in being the one who addresses, for Gandhi, but in being one who can be addressed. Having consciousness, basically, awareness. And when we address ourselves, right, this is what gives birth to I and the division between self and the world. Right? A better way of thinking about it is you are like a part of the world, right? A concentric circle. Right? So like concentric circles, you're like a subset of the world. You're literally within it. But the moment you start thinking of yourself firmly in terms of I, what you've done is you've removed yourself from the immediate situation, right? And you've removed yourself not just from the immediate situation, but to an extent from the world as it is, right? In addressing another, you are no longer in the most natural state of being, which is one who can be addressed. You've assumed the role of active agent divorced from the world and affecting it, rather than passive agent, right, who is part of the world and is affected by it, mutually affecting it. The world can direct our attention in any number of ways, right? But our own agency means that we can also direct our attention. And this is the important part.